everything is a bet. Not only do you have to take more risk and invest more money than any other normal retail operation or agricultural company that you're working on, but the loss is so much greater and you have very little recourse.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields, and with me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we got a very special guest, Christina Betancourt Johnson, CEO of Standard Wellness Maryland. Christina, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing today?
Awesome. Midday, average Tuesday. Doing great.
Excited to have you here. Kellen, how are you doing?
Doing really well. Really excited to talk to Christina. Excited to talk Maryland. I know it's near and dear to your heart. So, doesn't seem like there's much West Coast stuff here, but should be a good East Coast conversation. You know what I mean, Brian?
I love it, Kellen. You didn't even try. And yes,
DC was like she was born over there, loyalty through and through. Like I think her father is from there too. So I was like, I got nothing.
We'll quickly put her on the record, but yes, let the record reflect. It will be another East Coaster. So Christina, we got a little East Coast, West Coast battle. And if you had to choose a coast, which one are you taking?
Oh man. I don't know. I like to be bi-coastal. So, I like the idea of pulling down the best of everything. And so, on the West Coast, you've got a more relaxed vibe. It's not quite as competitive as the East Coast and gritty. We're trying to fight our way through the cold, and that shows up in everything we do, whether it's fighting our way through business or anything else. On the West Coast, you also have beautiful oceans, and you've got a great temperature. The topography is different. You've got all of the rolling hills, and you've got a little bit of everything within an hour's drive. But on the East Coast, it's the attitude. I grew up here, so I'm used to the attitude, and I like the go-get-itness of where I am and the people around me. So I don't know. There are positives to both coasts. So I'd have to choose bi-coastal, which I'm not sure that was an option, but that's what I would choose.
I think that's a very PC answer, and I think Kellen is ecstatic to know that he went in thinking he had no chance to have you, and maybe leaves with a draw, which I think is the best you can do. So for our listeners unfamiliar about you, can you give a quick background about yourself and how you found your way to the cannabis space?
Yeah, so I'm DC, born and bred, grew up here, but I have lived in a few other places. I lived in Italy for a little while, Sicily, actually. I ran track, went to undergrad at Hampton, went to grad school down in Texas, studied marketing and organizational development, worked in the nonprofit sector, worked in the for-profit sector, was a developer for a long time, a chief executive officer at a national affordable housing organization too. And out of nowhere, in 2015-ish, ended up having a brain injury. And that sort of spun me into a different direction. A lot happened during that time, but fast forward a couple of years, I think I had a deeper understanding of sort of life purpose, and why I'm here and what I want to do. And I think I landed on being here to be of love and to be of service. So I kind of was living that way anyway. But there was an opportunity that was presented to me in 2017 around cannabis, and I had no desire at the time to go into cannabis. That was not an industry I had been looking or tracking, carefully. I hadn't been looking at it or tracking it carefully, and kind of went down a rabbit hole in pursuit of more information about the sector. And I just did a big event, like a speakers event for Glow, which is our brand, and then did another, one of our brands, and then did another for Women Grow. And told the whole story there. But the long and short of it is I got challenged to kind of go into the space, took courses, looked at performas, traveled across America and looked at, existing operations and all of this in a relatively short amount of time. And I thought, there's a huge opportunity in this space, bombastic growth. And one of the few industries where you can be just a human. I'm not even going to bring in sort of the demographic component, but just a human and transition as a CEO in one sector to a CEO in another sector where you have no experience on the actual product, right? Limited experience, right? So if you were a CEO in healthcare, you're not going to be able to jump in and be a CEO in oil and gas. It doesn't work that way. If you're a CEO in, let's say, the car industry, you're not going to transition and just be a CEO in pharmaceuticals. They want a deep subject matter expertise. Cannabis is a little bit different because it's so nascent. We actually have a much more welcoming environment to people who have good skills that are hardworking and sort of are committed to the values of the industry. And to some extent, that's openness, that's fairness, that's health, that's wellness, that's equity. And so I think for me, I saw an opportunity, let's layer in the demographics here, as a woman of color, and as an executive to transition into this pretty welcoming space and like make something great. And so that's how I sort of transitioned into this space. I could go more into detail, but that's like the summary. And then so I popped in here in 2017, pursued licensure in 2 states, ended up winning. In Maryland, we ended up getting cultivation out of the gate. That got taken away. We had to pursue it through a legal process. And then we ended up picking up retail through a legislative process. And then another round of licensure, which just occurred a year ago. We ended up, partnering with a processor and social equity applicant and picked up processing. So we're now vertical in Maryland. We're really excited about that. And that's under Standard Wellness Maryland.
What I loved about what you said was that you looked at the sector, you considered the opportunity at hand, you ran some numbers with the pro forma. You're like, all right, check, check, check. This makes sense. Here's a really good opportunity for me to kind of dive in. What was that first moment where you were like, welcome to cannabis? I know all these things that I had deeply detailed and prepared going in. None of that is going to work out. Here is the true reality. Was there a specific moment?
Application process. Absolutely. I had in my head, so like we got to start off. I'm a very values-based, sort of integrity-based kind of person. And like, I believe in conscious capitalism. I think we can do well by doing good. Like I have this good stuff that makes up who I am. And I was envisioning, okay, we're going to build this company. It's going to be, hopefully it's someday vertically integrated. It's going to be dedicated to empowering individuals through the healing power of cannabis and all of this other good shit. And then I prepare for the application process in Maryland. And this was back in 2017 is when it started. The actual application dropped and was submitted in 2019. And it was the most rigorous, arduous, valueless, like you weren't going in leading with your heart, right? Like that's what I had in mind. But this was numbers. This was, do you have past performance? Here are the metrics we're grading. This was a grading system that was a really rigorous application that was graded in Maryland. And so it took me back to sort of my business, my business approach in any other industry that I worked in, where it's like, all of these things are being graded. You have to answer the questions to score the highest grade. And that for me was counterintuitive to sort of what philosophically I wanted to build, right? Like I wanted to build a company that was all about health and wellness and inclusivity and the healing power of cannabis. And I'm taking a test where, when you're in class, I guess, Brian, you went to school in Baltimore, but you're taking a test, right? You want to be able to take the course so that you're learning the information. You're digesting it, you're enjoying the coursework, you're enjoying the teacher and everybody's in the room. And that's what I had envisioned in cannabis, right? But when you go to take that test, it's like, no, you're taking the test to fucking get an A on this test. Because if you get an F on the test, you may not be able to stay in the school or stay in the program. And so you have to prepare to get that A. That's the bottom line. And so that, I think, made very real for me the dichotomy that exists inside of the cannabis sector, right? It's the goodwill, the intentional, doing the right thing. And it's also very much so the political, the quality assurance, the rigorous regulations, the compliance, the taxes, all of the things that are absolutely necessary in the space that we're actually graded by, that is then married to or juxtaposed in a lot of ways, all of the goodness that we're doing for people when we're healing them with this plant. So, I would say the application process for me was like, what? It was so different than what I had sort of been doing for the previous year or two as I learned about the sector and sort of prepped. That was my aha moment.
I think that's so perfectly said, because I think people from the outside sometimes have this vision of, okay, like this is how the cannabis industry operates. And I think exactly like you described, you went in with all these intentions and wanted it. And on day one, when you were submitting the application, you recognized, oh, this is a balance and I have to ensure that I can do both at the same time, because if you don't do one, you certainly can't do the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say if you don't do all of those things, the compliance, the quality assurance, brand management, every part of the business, and then times 10 because it's cannabis, right? It's harder to manage your brand. It's harder to advertise. It's harder to market. If you don't do those exceptionally well, you're going to lose. And not lose a little bit, you're going to lose big, because in cannabis, everything is a bet. Not only do you have to take more risk and invest more money than any other normal retail operation or agricultural company that you're working on, but the loss is so much greater and you have very little recourse. It's not like you can go to the Better Business Bureau. I mean, it's, it's a nascent industry. So everything is completely new and different than everything else. So you have to be exceptionally well at the others, is what I'd call them, which is the foundation of any business. But in cannabis, like I said, that there are these two sort of polar opposite aspects of running the business that you've got to have mastery of and do well to succeed.
So you get the cultivation license, you go through that experience. At what point do you then realize that you're like, hey, I need retail and processing, and you're like, I want to become vertically integrated? How far along that process?
When I submitted the application. So the application round that I was in was called, was a 2019 House Bill 2 round. And that was a result of there being this disparity study in the state that looked at how many women are in here, how many ethnic minorities are in here as owners in the 2014 and 2015 round. So it was a reflective look at sort of what the industry was and how it's evolved. And as a result of the disparity study, you had some legislation that got passed that said, okay, we need another round of licensing in two particular categories: cultivation and processing. That legislation was House Bill 2. And that is what introduced the next round of licensure. And there ended up being 4 cultivators and about 15 or so processors that came out of that. And so in that round, you had to have certain qualifications, and it actually was race-based. It was income-based. There were all of these requirements to actually qualify as a business owner. And they were difficult to comply with, but I knew early on, you wanted to own the vertical. There was no question in my mind what the benefits would be. And so I knew that when I first applied, and knowing that I couldn't even get retail.
So the numbers make sense. You want to go vertical because from an economic standpoint, that allows you to kind of control the supply chain, make sure you can hit your numbers. But coming from outside industry, you have to find experts that you can rely on in order to help grow the plant under the due rules and regulations. And then processing, can you dive into that? Is that extraction? What specifically? Take us through who the first hires were and how critical they were in order to make sure that you got off the gate correctly.
Yeah, so let me tell you, from my vantage point, why I wanted to be vertically integrated. I think the first thing, as you said, it was just control over the supply chain. We knew that by owning cultivation, processing, and retail, we ensure consistency in the product, in the product quality, in the pricing, and then the availability. And it really minimized disruptions caused by sort of third-party suppliers. And when you're coming into a market that's not mature, but kind of mature, there were operators that were already operating. I knew that it would be very difficult if I had to be hyper dependent on another operator to get what I needed. And as a newcomer, I wanted to be able to control my margins too, and ensure that I wasn't getting the shittiest product that they had put out, right? I wanted good flour, and I wanted something, even if it wasn't the top of the line flour, if we were going to process it, I wanted to make sure that it was, high in terps. There were certain things that I wanted in it so that it could be a quality processing output too. Shit in, shit out. You get gold in, gold out. So I wanted to be very careful about control of the supply chain, but the better margins and profitability were important. Brand consistency, managing the customer journey and customer loyalty was inconsistency. Those things were important, I think market adaptability and being able to adjust so that you could have sort of a competitive advantage in real time, paying attention to market trends and pricing, that's proven to be really important on the retail side for us. And then from a regulatory and compliance advantage, I thought it would also provide us better oversight of compliance and regulatory adherence, right? It would reduce risk. And so I started off with sort of an idea of sort of innovation and new products. And, it costs a lot to do an R&D exercise at any company. But in cannabis, the interesting thing is there isn't as much spent in R&D in cannabis because you can't. You don't have the big universities that you can rely on for sort of the scientific background as a starting point. And we don't have those big margins that we can use to say, all right, well, we're going to give 20% to marketing and then let's dump this into R&D. You just don't have that. Our margins are razor thin because of 280E and sort of our tax burden. So early on, I think during the application process, I realized to be good on paper, you had to have, certain people stacked up on your team. And luckily, because I had been in the nonprofit sector, I had been in the for-profit sector, I worked with government, I had a vast array of resources at my disposal. And those people proved to be invaluable because I was just asking a ton of questions and I was able to put together a really strong team just for the application. And though we didn't get licensed until like 5 years later, um, we over the course of 5 years were able to kind of identify people who would come in at various points in time to set up the business. So like whether it was HR or regulatory compliance, I was able to tap various people over time to get us to where we are today. And we're still operationalizing the business. I mean, right? We're still in the early stages of this. My first hire though was my HR sort of people operations person, but she also was leading retail operations at Cookies for a while. So I had the benefit of sort of a twofer, like we were able to say, all right, strategically, how should we approach operationalizing this business with good people and putting people first? Because that's what I care about. And then we want to go to market. The lowest barrier to entry is probably retail because of the cost and the investment. And so that was the route that we explored. And we also knew in order to get funding for cultivation, especially if we were going with a lender, they wanted to be able to see past performance. So that's where having retail operational, we had EBITDA, we had cash flow that they could look at and it would give us better terms. So it was like a strategy that she helped me with, I would say, and our advisors along the way. So, I also had an operational partner, right, in Standard Wellness. They were up and running in other states. So they were also a sounding board. I don't want to discount that. But most of the work that we did was sort of in-house, if you will.
What was the hardest part of the vertical integration, right? We talked about all the benefits and like all that stuff, but like what was like tangibly like the most challenging or is still the most challenging part of like making it functional?
Year one, we lost a lot of money and we weren't even operational. There's no income coming in. The challenge was that the state mandated that we be operational by a certain date and we had a 12-month window. And so for us, it was, for I think everybody in our class or pool, like, the 4 cultivators, it was extended, but we still had to get operational by the end of 2024. So we didn't get licensed until the spring of 2022. We had to wait for the adult use round because I knew in that round, hey, there's going to be a whole new set of licensees. I can't forecast in the market if I don't know how many new licenses are coming online. So I couldn't raise capital. So, we were sort of sidelined for like 18 months, not being able to raise capital. And we're just like kind of fucking sitting around. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, but go. All right, now we've got adult use and now you got to be operational within 18 months. And I'm like, okay, we had 3 bad real estate deals, right? Or 3 real estate deals that were good that went bad. Let me say it differently. We lost money there. We lost money on deposits. We lost money on attorneys negotiating. So we're talking about several hundreds of thousands of dollars, by the way. Like this is not $10,000. These attorneys are not billing as though they're trash collectors. They're picking up all of our money. That's what they're picking up and putting in garbage bags. And so, I would say had the biggest challenge was coming up with the solution to meet the needs of all of our stakeholders. And what I mean by that, Kellen, is, all right, we had our regulators who wanted to know basically, what was your timeline? How are you going to operationalize this? And you got to get it done by a certain deadline. We had investors who were like, what's the plan? And sometimes those 2 plans are a little bit different. Then we couldn't fundraise fast enough, but we were given money by the state, a significant amount of money in grants to operationalize, but we had to answer to them too. We had lawmakers that we had been working with and they wanted to see something, like they wanted to see results because we were one of 4, right? And then you have the general public that we had sort of been whetting the appetite of. So you have all of these stakeholders that you're trying to ensure that you're able to service. I think just getting through year one of getting our 2 licenses, we literally got one of them on December 31st. 2024. And so like, if we did not meet our cutoff deadline for cultivation, for instance, we wouldn't have a license today. And so, we ended up operationalizing in pods, Kellen, instead of doing a big grow. And I had big plans. I had 50,000 square feet. I had 100,000 square feet. Like, I just knew we were going to have all of this canopy and we were going to be able to do what everybody else did. No, we were not. We were able to set up what felt like a trailer in a trailer park and get operational there just to get the license to secure it. So then we could start growing in a larger facility. And I think like sometimes the regulatory piece and the compliance piece, I mean, people talk about it all the time, but you don't know what, like, tangibly, what does that mean for somebody that's not in the space? What it means is if we didn't buy those trailers that I got from another operator in West Virginia because I knew their investor who was trying to get rid of them. And, I just happened to have that conversation because I sat on a board with them. And then we had a conversation at an event where we were on a panel. Like, if you don't build up all of these relationships over time and do the work before you're operational, it's going to be very hard to navigate the space because you're hearing information on panels, you're hearing information when you go to conferences, you're building relationships, you're talking to people. Those are the things that feed you when you need it. You don't know when you're going to need the information, but had I not have heard that they were trying to get rid of these things like 9 months earlier than when I needed them, I wouldn't have been able to get them, And so I think for me, the hardest part was sort of managing the requirements of all of our stakeholders. Some of them were compliance, some of them were financial, some of them were regulatory, and also being like kind of a public figure. People have started to say, oh, like I've seen her face a few places. And so you got to be careful about your messaging. You got to be careful about how you're presenting yourself, like it's a tough balance sometimes, I would say, a very difficult balance.
I would say it's like near impossible, right? Because also cannabis doesn't just grow instantaneous as much as that would be wonderful. But like you need to have the infrastructure in place. You need to have the personnel in place. You need to have the resources in place. Yes. And I'm sure that pro forma, again, you have this grand old concept of like, all right, when we're ripping off the brake, this is how it's going to go. But instead, we'll just do 1/16 of this. We also want to hit end product and we also want to do extraction. So how do we divvy this up? And then how do we hit our numbers so that it makes sense is the ultimate balance, exactly like you said.
It is. I would say it's, this is like an incredible melody of vision, sort of actualizing things and failure. Like, it's just this crazy melody of these things that is constantly happening. And you have to have, I think, a degree, an incredible degree of grit and fortitude, but you also have to have like a lot of grace. Like, you learn pretty quickly, especially I'm not a big cannabis user. You learn pretty quickly, like you got to mellow out. You got to give other people room. You got to give yourself room. You thrive in the freaking gray area. You have to. Like, you cannot live in black and white. I'm very much so a black and white person. I'm a Virgo. Like, I see shit. This is the way it's supposed to be. We got to march in this direction. Here are my 475 plans. Does everybody have it? Like, do y'all have a handle on all of my plans? Like, this is what we got to do. Throw all of that up in the air like it's confetti and sit back and then figure out a little bit day by day. That's the adjustment in cannabis. And I think it's hard to like understand because it's intangible until you get into it. It's almost like marriage. You see other people doing it, but you have no idea what's happening behind closed doors, right? And people are smiling. You see some of the photos on Instagram and everything else. People do they do like these podcasts and these series and shit. All of it is nothing compared to what happens when you get in the house with the other person you're about to, be betting. And so it's like the same in cannabis. Like, we see what it looks like. We see the brands. They look beautiful. These Photoshop pictures of like all of the plants and everything else. And it's like, oh, this is great. And people write reviews. They love the product. And then you kind of see these maybe 10 to 20 people talking about cannabis that are CEOs, right? Because they're the same people getting tapped, unless they're in smaller venues and podcasts and stuff. And then you hear from other folks and they're talking about the challenges, but you don't know what it feels like because you're not married to it yet. But when you get married to it, it's like, oh my God, the ring is burning my finger. It's like the wedding ring is burning my finger. And it's the same in cannabis. Like, so much is so different. And so you gotta be resilient. You gotta have grit. I was, I don't remember what this quote was, but it was basically like, it's the last 20% of an effort that makes the most difference. And that's where you have to actually give 120%, because the people who don't push past, like the first 80, it's heavy and hard, but that last 20%, that's where you have to go harder than everybody else. And that's the differentiator between companies that are successful and companies that aren't. Somebody was going at full speed in that last 20%. They saw things differently. They listened more carefully. They were able to give themselves grace along the way so that they could keep going. They massaged their muscles out, right, while they were running around the track, and they just kept going. That, I think, is something that you don't get until you're in the space. Like, you can't fully appreciate it.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's like a quote too by I think it's Georgia Tech's football coach, where he's like, how long are you willing to run when like the distance is unknown? And that is like literally what cannabis is right now. Because like everyone talks about federal legalization, but like
it's not coming.
I think I'm on record saying that it was going to be 2024, like before 2020. Like,
way to go, Kellen. Glad we didn't fit that.
There's hundreds of those times too. It's not just once, but in actuality, like that's what it feels like when you're in it. You're like, okay, in 4 years, someone is going to have to get a sense of what's going on and realize like, this is ridiculous. Like, why are we running uphill while being pushed down the hill?
Yeah. And then you have all of these curveballs. It's sort of like not just running the race, like a steeplechase. And like you have a little bit of everything in there. So like you're jumping over hurdles and then jumping into water, and then you keep going. And the next thing you know, like, I don't know, dog poo gets thrown at you from the stands, or a tomato hits you in the head. Like, there are all of these curveballs, right? And it is absolutely wild. And I think, I'm on the board of the U.S. Cannabis Council. It's an incredible lobbying and advocacy group. We hear something new every month. We've got weekly meetings, but like, I would say from meeting to meeting, there's always new things that are coming up. I mean, we had hemp, right, that came out of nowhere a few years ago as a real challenge. You had the farm bill. Then you have like some iterations. You've got some people driving a Mack truck through the farm bill. You've got challenges at a state level where cannabis is really flourishing. And then there are hemp, I would say, competitors, moving products that are intoxicating. And you're like, well, what do I do? Like, you have to pivot. You've got to be innovative, and you've got to figure out other ways to survive. So I think cannabis as an industry is really, truly a bizarre thing. It's really unique. It's really, really unique.
And one of the elements that makes it even more challenging is the fact that all the states are completely different. So give us a grasp of the states that you operate in and some of the fun differences of them.
Well, we won in New York, and we actually won originally in DC. We could not get place carded, and a few things hiccuped there, so we dropped the DC license. But we won in New York and got retail. We partnered with a justice-involved individual, right? That was sort of how they characterized their social equity program. I think that the program there was very well-intentioned. It was, like many things in cannabis, well-intentioned and poorly rolled out or operationalized. I think what was intended by maybe the governor and the former head of the agency was a really nice idea, but there were a few things missing, like you have justice-involved individuals, right? Brian and Kellen, these individuals have been charged with offenses. They've perhaps gone to jail. They're human beings. If you've done time, there's one thing that unilaterally most people who have done time, they don't have: trust. They don't trust the system. They don't trust authority. They fucking don't trust their partners. And so when you've got an entire program built around people who fundamentally do not trust for valid reasons, and they've been unfairly targeted because of this political system that sort of, hung their hats on a war on drugs and it being bad, and not just cannabis, but marijuana, and targeting certain types of people, you've got an undercurrent of a problem. And it's not a small undercurrent, it's a riptide. And so what they have was all of these justice-involved individuals partnering with whomever, right? And there's a lack of trust, and you can't teach trust. And it doesn't happen on some regulator's timeline. So they say you got to get operational, you got to do all these things. those justice involved individuals, I mean, without saying it, are like, fuck your timeline. Like, we have to learn who these partners are. We got to learn a whole new industry. We've got to learn a legitimate business, right? It's totally different than, I think, Maryland in so many ways, because they didn't have that justice involved individual requirement. But I think sometimes legislation can be well intended. You know, the intent of the law is there, but standing it up it's a totally different story. So for me, the justice involved individual piece from New York to Maryland was totally different. Now, our new regulator in Maryland is from New York. I'm excited about her. I think she's really smart. I think she's sharp. I look forward to seeing how this plays out in Maryland and what she does in this market with her experiences in New York. I think failure is one of the best teachers, you know, but in Maryland, we have a very tightly regulated market, and our legislators and our regulators are extremely sensitive to challenges presented by intoxicating hemp that's not tested, not regulated. They are extremely sensitive to consumer safety. And I think from the ground up, so from your local elected officials all the way up to the governor, who obviously in Governor Wes Moore was close to cannabis, having sat on GTI's board. So I think we have a really informed legislative body, and actually all three branches are pretty informed here. And consumer safety is at the forefront. In New York, I think equity was a hot topic and at the forefront, right? And so you had all these pop-ups. We all saw it happening. You guys saw it. We all saw everything blowing up. People were in Times Square being able to buy out of trailers. You know, you had the equivalent of like food trucks everywhere in New York where you could just buy product. You had these landlords that were renting out space, 200, 300 square feet, just pushing product that had come from California. That's not happening quite the same way in Maryland. And so, there were a lot of differences. I think there were probably a lot of similarities too, and that the programs were they were well intended. Like, I think that the legislators, they had good intentions. They really wanted to diversify the sector, and they wanted to build a strong sector that was sustainable. It's just rolling it out sometimes can be a bit of a bear. You know,
I think that's really well said, because I think it's so difficult to manage all of the kind of moving pieces simultaneously and have this goal in mind, but recognize exactly like you did, Christina, when you got started, was that like, this is how everything looks on paper. This is how everything should work. But in practicality and actuality, it's not how it's actually going to work.
Yeah. And it's important for, I think, leaders, whether you're an elected official, whether you're an entrepreneur, you've got your own podcast, or whoever you are as a leader, it's important to be iterative and to be comfortable with reiterating or like adjusting as you go. Because I think the iterative nature of cannabis has to do with everything from regulations being super dynamic to evolution in plant understanding and education and technology, to like the different types of people that are coming into the space. And so you really have to be agile in this space. And I think that is really actually across the board. If you're a leader, you've got to be incredibly agile and iterative. So,
and I think that through iteration, we'll see like they may not be like massive 20% gains right off the bat, right? But we'll start to see like tiny incremental changes, right? Like, for instance, like I was just in Brooklyn this weekend and there was no bodegas at all in sight. And like my buddy who lives there was like, all the bodegas went out of business randomly. They were just closed. And now he has to go to a legal store that's like actually licensed. And so like there is incremental changes, and like I don't know if that's permanent. Like right now it's just March 2025, so we'll see. But like it's something, you know what I mean? So like hopefully cannabis continues to make these incremental changes, right? And like what are some of the items that you would like to see within like the Maryland market, for instance?
Oh boy. Don't put me in the hot seat, Kellen. I'm in the middle of the General Assembly session.
It's just the three of us.
Look,
we won't tell anyone.
I think the thing is, there's legislation. I think one of the areas that I think we're going to have to address immediately, there's legislation on the before the General Assembly right now related to consumption lounges. I think you've got an equity issue with regards to how people can consume safely, especially when it applies to people that are in rental properties. And any buildings that are subsidized or that have loans on them, right? Like you cannot consume on those properties. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so I think there is an equity concern there and an access concern there. But I also think that there's a safety concern there. And there are a lot of businesses that are already having events like pop-ups where people can consume in community. And cannabis is absolutely a community-based substance. The usage is very community-based. And so I think Maryland is going to have to tackle that. They really are. And the bill that we have right now is basura, trash, I would say. So, I'm not a legislator. I'm not the one drafting it. It didn't come out of my shop, but I think that it's a good start. Like, you have to start somewhere. A lot of people criticized the bill when it came out. I came out publicly and said, like, I'm glad about it. And people were pissed. I can't believe she supports it. Look, I don't support everything in the bill, but again, like, we got to lead with grace. This shit is iterative. It's a start. At least they proposed a bill on the matter. It needs to be addressed. Like, let's work to get there, people. That's one of the things, Kellen, I will say, like, I think what I'd like to see in not just Maryland, this is across the US, is I'd like to see more people involved in the legislative process. Right now, it belongs to a small few. I don't think that people fully appreciate or understand how to activate in that space. I don't think people understand how to build relationships before they have asked. I don't think that people understand how to respect legislators, right? And understand they're not subject matters in your topic. They really are not. They are elected by the people to learn about 300 different topics and vote on things that affect how those topics play out in real life. That's a crazy thing. Right? Like, we have committees that specialize in things, but still they're not experts. They don't necessarily work in that field that they're evaluating or that topic area. So I think we need like poli-sci boot camps in cannabis so people understand political science and how it works effectively and how it can work in your favor. That would be like, if I could change one thing, that would be what I'd change across the nation, is how people understand the political process and then how they activate within it effectively.
You think that would be like an educational approach? Like, how could that work? Like, that's a very interesting topic. And given what we see in the political world today, like, people are very divisive and it's a hot topic for most. So like, how would that approach be best? Yeah.
I'm not sure that, I don't know, Brian, because I can tell you who doesn't want people to learn. That I don't think that somebody's going to smack my hand for this, but I don't think that regulators would want the masses to understand how regulatory affairs and legislative affairs works necessarily, because that makes them a lot more powerful. It makes the masses powerful. I don't know that legislators want everybody to understand it either, because then you have a lot more people approaching them, trying to educate them, trying to direct them, trying to motivate them or influence them. I don't think they want that. But in terms of having proper representation and a say, people have to understand the process and they need to be professional about it. And I think that we have a dearth of understanding. I'm speaking broadly. There are a lot of people that get it, but there are a lot more that don't. And that's how you end up with like lopsided legislation. People get upset when it's activated, but it's like, you may not feel it until a year later. And then they're like, whoa, what happened? Like, I feel like I just got hit by a tornado. I don't know. Well, the tornado was starting 2 years ago, ma'am. Like, and so I think it's an interesting thing. I think that's one of those things that I had the benefit of coming into the sector with a little bit of information and knowledge on that I see a lot of people not having. Maybe, I don't know.
No, it's really interesting, right? And like, as I'm thinking about it, I'm envisioning a lot of people who like to just complain and be like, hey, like, it's always these same people who are arguing with legislators. Well, that's not how it has to work. You can spend your time and do that if you want change. At the end of the day, right? Like, legislators they work for you, and you position yourself in front of them in order to make the change. And it requires every single person to try to do a little bit.
Yeah. And I also think that it doesn't have to be like at the state level. Like, we don't have to talk about regulatory compliance and changes there. Like, at the local level, you can get involved in how permitting is done. We're in Baltimore. Hate to throw Baltimore under the bus here, but I think there are some areas of opportunity in Baltimore. Like, we should have, really clear instructional for everybody coming into the sector. Here are the things that you need to consider when pursuing licensure, but here's what you need to consider in the 50 or so local jurisdictions that you're in. And here, in terms of permitting, are the things that you're going to have at the ready. And here is in each jurisdiction, these are the different types of people you're going to interact with. Because some people don't know, they haven't started the real estate process before, like they haven't gone through that process. All they know is like running a business, maybe, or nothing. Maybe they know nothing, but like you can go to your local officials and get some of that information, and you can talk to your local officials, your elected, city council members, and say, hey, the permitting process is bad. Let's change this. Or we have ideas about how to change this. And you can make those changes happen. But a lot of people they don't know how to do that. And I would also say collaboration is a big thing. Like, I see we have a lot of smaller advocacy groups that don't work with the larger advocacy groups. And if they actually combine, they could be a lot more powerful. And these smaller groups could have more of a say. These smaller groups are kind of affinity groups, but if you combine the power of them, you actually can be a lot more effective, So I would say I'd love to see that too. Kind of boring stuff. Your listeners are probably like, I don't want to hear about this, but I do think that that's really important. If you're a cannabis nerd, politics is probably not super interesting, but it's the whole infrastructure of the industry. Without politics, you don't have an industry.
I also think though that there's like an intrinsic value associated with like a deeper understanding of poli-sci. Yeah, there's this whole like avenue that you just explained where you can go talk to regulators, but there's also the avenue where you're talking to your friends, right? You're maybe trying to have agency over your own life, starting a business, and like understanding these fundamentals of like regulations and like county laws, right? Like instead of it being something like it's an unknown, you're scared of it, you don't do it, then you judge it. Now it's like the deep state is against you or something like that. Right. Realistically, it's like just get educated, get involved, and then it's all clear. And there's a roadmap to get to the end, like to your goal. It's just scary because you didn't see all the steps along the way. And so I do think that there's a huge value associated with that. And in cannabis, especially, right? Like having conversations at the regional level leads to movements at a state level, which then leads to movements at a federal level. And right now, everyone complains that like we haven't got over the federal level insight. Well, it's because there just clearly wasn't enough movement at the regional levels, because like there's still a massive opposition to it at the federal level. So there wasn't enough momentum when we went through regional to state and then tried to get through federal. So I think that there is like still a tremendous value just from like a person to person, like deeper understanding of a political landscape. You know what I mean?
I totally agree with that. I totally agree.
That's my little soapbox.
That was solid, dude. That was solid.
We appreciate your soapbox.
That was solid. That was solid.
Bringing the soapbox into the conversation.
So, Christina, 1 year from now, what has changed?
Where? Well, I'm sure that I'm going to have more gray hair. You can see this gray hair is coming in here. I got all of that in the last 5 years. I have beautiful brown hair. It's now like all gray. I look like what's the girl's name on not the Avengers, X-Men, that has like that streak of silver?
That's pretty badass.
Storm is like all silver, but there was the girl that goes crazy. I can't think of her name, but she has that.
Oh, yeah, I know. She's got like the crazy powers, right?
Rogue, was that her name? Yeah, crazy power. Well, maybe I'll have that in a year, but I'll add to the hair some more grays. I think in a year at the local level, I think, I hope to have some of the social equity licensees that were licensed last year operational. I think we will have a consumption bill that's moved. And so we'll have some events that will be legal, that will be regulated. And I think that, I think we'll also have some movement in sale of operators in the next, I would say 12 to 24 months. And I do think that while we will not be legalized, that we will get some federal relief in the form of rescheduling. I do believe that will happen in 2025. So with the rescheduling happening, we're going to potentially get some relief in taxes. It should be automatic, but with our administration, you just never know. Lots of curveballs coming out of the White House these days. We got a lot of fun executive orders, all types of wild stuff. So I'm not sure what that will look like, but we certainly have, we'll have a circus to contend with, when it comes to rescheduling. I think we'll also have, I I think because of that, we're also going to have a lot of movement and consolidation. So I think the mergers and acquisitions that we saw a couple of years ago happening, I think we'll probably have a flurry of those. I think we'll have more brands that pop up. I love the idea of this brand proliferation and all of these brands growing. I think that's where you can really penetrate the culture. And I think that if they're culture forward and customer forward, we're going to have some pretty incredible stuff coming, I think, in the market. I do think that with rescheduling, you're actually going to have a different degree of research and development too. We're not going to see that in the next year. It won't be actualized, but I think that it will happen. I'd love to see the US market be able to work more closely with other countries in terms of our research. I mean, I think that what Israel has done is incredible, and it's been done for decades. So why we're not really able to tap into that, I don't know. I don't have the bandwidth to go, across the country. I can barely do the bi-coastal thing we were talking about, but I wish that we could tap into our friends and partners in other countries. I know they had an incredible program out of Oregon, University of Oregon, and they were working across sort of this, is it longitudinal or latitudinal line with other nations that were able to grow cannabis in this ideal sort of geography and sort of topography. And so I think that there are probably a lot of partners from Israel to Pakistan and China that we could work with. I think that would be great. Don't know that I'll see it, but I'd like to see that in the next year. I think that I would like to see, I don't know if this will happen, but I would like to see wellness come out more. I think that if we get rescheduled, there will be a lot of interest from insurance companies, I think other pharmaceutical brands, in what we're doing. So what that means, I don't know, but I do think that there will be interest from those entities. And I think we're going to have to pay attention and figure out what does that mean for us. So I'd like to see that. I don't know. That's all I've got. I'm no mind reader, no magician. Certainly cannot look into any glass, anything and figure it out. But I think that's sort of what I'm feeling from my peers, and that's what I'm observing.
I love it. Last question. What question do you wish more people asked you?
What question do I wish more people asked me? That's a good one. I wish, because I do encounter a lot of entrepreneurs, I wish people asked me if I could go back and do it all over again, what would I do differently? Because I think that there are a lot of lessons, again, in failure. And people want to hear, like, what are you doing now? What's so great? But if people were to say, hey, where did you screw up? Hey, I got a list for you. And I think that would help people avoid traps. I mean, if I had to go back and do it all over again, I may be in plant touching, but I actually might be in an ancillary business.
What would you do?
What would I do? I'm not sure, but on the marketing side, there's a lot of interesting stuff. My background was in marketing, org development, lobbying too. Like I've enjoyed that space, but I definitely think that there's some value in sharing the mistakes and the follies. And I think a lot of people don't ask about that. So I don't know. It's not something that you think to go up to a CEO and say, hey, where did you screw up most? But reframing it as what would you do differently or better? I think we all would be happy to share that sort of information with people as they're starting out or building. And I think there's a lot of value in the answer.
Is there one particular that comes to mind that you could quickly share?
Yeah, I think that I've been accused of sometimes being a type A personality and doing a lot on my own. And I think that early on, I felt very alone, like when I first got started, and I thought I had to do a lot on my own and figure it out. And I don't know, I think that might have been manufactured. And I think it was a little bit of a mistake. So because it was my first foray into the space, I was afraid. And so I was like, well, I know I can manage it. That goes back to the type A. Like I know what I can do and I can be responsible for it. But I think there would have been more agility and a faster faster pace to market, if I had engaged more with others in a trust forward way. Because I think I engaged with people and I got what I needed, but I was so afraid of trusting fully and being vulnerable that I wasn't able to necessarily hand off and say, go. And sometimes you move faster when you're able to do that and redirect. That's what I would say my failure was, thinking I could do everything. I don't know. I don't know that it was ego. I think it was more fear.
I think it's a great answer. I really do, especially given all the challenges and everything that operates in the space. I think that's a really, really well said answer. So for our listeners, they want to get in touch, they want to learn more, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can definitely go on Instagram, and on any given day, we're actually there. We might get cut because Meta likes to do that with
Shout out Zuck.
Yeah, and so it's the Forest Baltimore. You can also go to standardwellness.com and get to our dispensary, but you can also find me personally on Instagram at Cannachris _ CANNACHRIS _ so you can get to the dispensary through Instagram. You can Google us. You can get to me on Instagram or LinkedIn. And then our, company, Standard Wellness Maryland, our operating entity, you can find at standardwellness.com.
We'll link it all up in the show notes. Thanks for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for your time, guys.